Thanks for coming. Just a quick one from me. It's World Mental Health Day on Thursday, but we have quite a busy day on Thursday with Town Hall and some other events in the afternoon. So we thought we would invite Sean to come and speak to us on today. Sean is an influencer, a model, and a passionate believer in mental health. He himself was diagnosed with OCD at 27, and he's kind of led him on a path of giving a few talks around it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Sean.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hey, everyone. So before I even go any further, I'm going to play a video just to start this off. Let's go back.
It's a lonely road, and they don't care about what you know. It's not about how you feel, but what you provide inside that home. Yeah, I know this life can really beat you down. You wanna scream, but you won't make a sound. Got so much weight that you've been holding, but won't show any emotion. As a man that goes unspoken, that we can't cry when life gets hard. Unconditional loves for women, children, and dogs. We know that we just have to play our parts, and don't nobody give a damn about our broken hearts. Yeah, as a man we gotta pave our way. Our only function is to work and slave. There's no respect for you if you ain't paid. You're disregarded as a human and you can't complain. And if you ever make it up and actually reach that place and find a woman that you love and give her your last name, you'll feel the thing.
So yeah, I like to always start any sort of talk with some very powerful imagery and videos. Is there anything that you were able to get from that video just to start off this talk when it comes to mental health? And you can throw any ideas out how you felt about it watching it. Okay, yeah. Is there anything else that you guys took away from it? So if I tell you the backdrop behind that video, I used to model, I no longer model anymore. That was at a time when I was going through quite a lot of really difficult things in my life. And as I go through the rest of the story, I'll explain it a little bit more, but that was just a snapshot in time. It was just a moment that reflects a lot of the journey that I have been on. So if I tell you a little bit more about myself, so yes, I should have put former model, not anymore. I do lived experience in consultancy. I work in the NHS as a children's wellbeing practitioner. I've delivered 4 TED Talks now. I'm hoping to go on to do another one. Mental health advocate and an educator. And a lot of my journey has been about using my own personal experience to try and help other people in the world. So eventually I'm hoping to be able to go on to do a PhD, perhaps in something surrounding men's health to some degree, to understand how we can change the world for men. Now, I've spoken quite extensively about my own story and how I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 27 years old, after having a series of intrusive thoughts for about 3 to 4 years, quite intense, distressing thoughts that I think a lot of people would easily be able to dismiss, but a lot of people with OCD, it can become quite repetitive in our heads. So these are some of the places that I've spoken about and told my story, and these are some of the other places I've worked at. Now, the next video I'm actually going to play is going to hopefully give you an even better idea of the place that I am now, actually delivering this talk. Let me play this. Oh, can you see that? Is that? I don't think this is working on my side. I don't think. Yeah, it's a video. Hopefully that should play now. He didn't die so that I died with him. He died and he lives through me. And I think that is so important on my journey to becoming the man that I wanted to be.
It was terrible, and it was just my brain on a hamster wheel. I became a recluse for a very long time. I was terrified to be outside. I was terrified to be triggered.
This time last year, I was in a very different place. I wanted to die. I didn't want to be alive anymore. I saw no way out.
This idea that you're supposed to be quite strong. If I allowed temporary feelings to make permanent decisions, I would have changed people's lives, essentially, for the worst, ultimately. Suicide doesn't stop the pain, you're only really moving it.
I woke up in the early hours of the morning on Christmas Day. My dad was having a heart attack. My mum performed CPR. Next thing, all I remember was that the paramedics came and they took him out. There was a knock on the door. 2 policemen came and they gave me the news. I walked upstairs, told my mother, and I could see the pain etched in her eyes. He had died. I held his hand and I said, "Mum, is Daddy coming back?" She said, "No, he's gone to heaven."
And it doesn't make you less of a man for being in pain, for being hurt, for being emotional. You have feelings too, and your feelings are valid and they are justified.
Is I tried to really get more black people to speak about their story, to write their story, to have no fear to reach out to me, because at the end of the day, it takes people to make a change for the other generations, you know, that will grow up after me to actually speak openly about their mental health.
We've had to be so strong for so long with everything that's happened in the world that we've created walls so big that other people can't get in and that we can't climb over.
But at the time, I describe it as I was living in hell. But there's a saying from Carl Jung that I really relate to, and it says, it is said a tree cannot reach to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And I think that's kind of where I am. I started to stop caring about the stigma. I started to stop caring about the embarrassment, because there's only so much it can do. People's opinions only hold so much weight, and if you live by people's opinions, you die by their criticism.
Yeah, there was a moment that changed my life forever on the 25th of December 2000. When I was 6 years old, my father passed away. He was a massive role model in my life. And I started to write the story because growing up, I never understood the impact of what it meant to lose a father. Growing up in inner city London, I went to a school with many other young men who, sadly, actually, most of them are in prison, some of them are in debt, and some of them are actually in mental health institutions. That's the kind of environment that I grew up in. I think I'm one of the lucky ones in many ways, but I never understood what it meant to lose a father. And as a result of his loss, my mum did as best as she could to raise me, to plug all the gaps. And I think a lot of mothers typically do that, with especially with a child, but especially with a son. And I was raised by, that's my mum on the right, that's my auntie Lorraine, the one with grey hair in the middle, and my auntie Merle, the one stuck underneath my armpit on a super hot summer's day, and then my auntie Mackie. So these were these 3 women here, including my mum, all promised to help to take care of me when my father died. Unfortunately, actually, last year Auntie Mel died. So the pancreatic cancer spread from the pancreas to the liver to the spleen. She passed away. And actually, my auntie Lorraine, we're actually trying to arrange her to come and live with us because she's showing signs of dementia. And just to put it into perspective, why they're so much older, my mum had me at 44. Technically, I'm classed as the miracle child. So my mum is 74. On the 22nd of November, I had to make sure I remember my mum's birthday. But these are the women that helped to take care of me. And that tells you about the cycle of life. These are the women that inspired me and taught me so much of who I was. As life went on, I didn't question anything else. I did what other young boys do. You kind of study, you know, you have fun, you drink, you vibes, whatever you might call it. And I became super successful. I was scouted by a modeling agency. So I'm 30 now, and this was when I was around 22 to about 27. Those are the years that I was modeling. And as you can obviously see, there's a visible size difference. So when I was in the industry, I looked completely different. I had to maintain a completely different body shape, a different image, and a different size. And this is a video that's actually going to show you a little bit more about my modeling journey.
Cheddar, cheddar, man, cheddar, cheddar. Trust me, I'm a cool getter. You can't talk, I'm a boost. Booty on the vote.
do you do when you need a good cry? Cause your circuits will fry and put your life on the line. But your life is online.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into where my modeling journey was back in the day. And as I said, I earned good money. I thought I made friends with people that I would be friends with for the rest of my life. COVID came, and pretty much all of the models that I knew and everyone else that I knew within the industry, their lives had completely been turned upside down. Most people had to go to work. A lot of people stopped being full-time models and went to go and do other jobs. But there was something quite sinister going on for me deep down that I actually was not aware of. And in spite of all the success, I deeply hated myself. And this was at a time when I was on the verge of probably becoming quite internationally quite well known. So there was interest by models, by agencies in New York, the Netherlands, Nigeria, all these different countries all across the world. But I had to maintain a particular image. And to put it into perspective, on the right was a picture of me at 83 kg. So obviously I'm 6'3", and I'm 100 kg now. So there's a visible size difference. And I considered the surgery, and I used to starve myself to have model-worthy cheekbones. And it was all for a moment in time, like those photos. I drank about 4 liters of water every morning. I wouldn't eat carbohydrates. I pretty much passed. I was on the verge of passing out on actually most of the shoots that I was in. But it was all for moments in time, all for the money, all for the fame, and all for the clout, really and truly. I got a lot of status everywhere I went. You can go to certain places. And there's actually a memory that I remember where I went to Wireless and I didn't pay for tickets to go by any sort of famous people, so to speak. But people recognized me and I was able to go into certain places, but nobody knew what was going on. And when I asked some of my friends what was going on, they had no idea as well. They said I masked quite well. And even when I tell my story, and even looking back at some of these moments, I still don't even recognize myself. I'm a completely different person now. I probably eat like 6 meals a day. I go to the gym and I enjoy food. Back then, probably could barely get 2 meals out of me, genuinely. And then I told a lot of my story. So what happened, I'm going to try and remember the particular moment. I woke up one morning, and this was before a shoot that I was doing with a Nigerian fashion designer. I just had an obsessive thought out of nowhere overnight that my sexuality had changed. And to a lot of people, it would be, why would that bother you? But I grew up in a very, and if I'm going to be very frank and very open, I grew up in a very homophobic, conservative Christian fundamentalist culture in the Caribbean. So the idea to be potentially gay or to be anything else than what you are was almost forbidden. It was a crime. Went to the shoot, carried on. Then some of the thoughts I started having irrational fears that I was gonna somehow out of nowhere catch HIV or some sort of STI. But then it reached a breaking point when I was with one of my female friends and I just had a sudden intrusive thought around sexual assault. And I panicked and I thought, what's going on? I don't want to hurt or harm anyone. Then it got worse after that. I started having images of myself jumping off of a bridge. And that's when I was like, something's wrong. So I spent the next couple of days, weeks actually, inside my house. I became quite terrified to be outside. And it was on the 24th of June, I woke up and I said I could no longer do this anymore. And I reached out to a therapist online, otherwise known, her name is Emma Garrick, otherwise known as the Anxiety Whisperer. And I begged her for a phone call, for a conversation. This was at a time when the NHS, well, they're still, they don't have enough spaces for anything. But I had no idea what was going on in my head. And I explained to her all the different thoughts that I was having, the places I was afraid to go to. She said, Sean, you have OCD. My life changed pretty much from that moment on. But my life got significantly worse. So after that, I was diagnosed with OCD. I ended up in hospital with pneumonia for 3 days, and that nearly killed me. I tore my right knee ligaments, ACL, MCL, meniscus, and I fractured my right leg. Completely wiped my knee out in football. After that, my cousin, unfortunately, that I grew up with in Trinidad, so where I'm from, he got murdered, actually. He got found in a car boot, tied up with gunshot wounds. Then after that, my auntie, the cancer spread even further. And then I found my half brother. So to give you a little bit of context with my half brother, he was gay. So our father kicked him essentially out of the house. And again, to put this into perspective, my half brother died at 62 years old, and I'm 30. So my dad had me considerably later on in life. He died as a result of bowel cancer. And when I found him, I was super excited, but he didn't really want a relationship. I think the trauma of what our father had done had kind of deeply affected the relationships that he was going on to later have. And then when I was on the phone to my therapist talking about some of the goals I wanted to have coming out of therapy, I typed in his name and I found out he had died on the 25th of August. So I thought, okay, cool, life can't get any worse than this. So I started to rebuild my life. I started to put pieces together. And then after that, actually, last year, whilst I was on my way back, I got a text from my stepsister. So my mum had moved on in life, and that's a whole nother story within itself. So my mum came to the country not as a result of her own choice, but my granddad. So to give you even more context, my granddad's Indian and Trinidadian, and that's a really common mix in Trinidad where we're from. And he didn't like the color of my mum's boyfriend's skin at the time. So he put her on a plane to the UK to nursing school, and that was it. Her life was all over. I, for years, grew up believing that my mum came to the UK as a result of her own choices. And then it started to make sense, my mum's behavior, the anxiety she had raising me. So I got the text from my stepsister. She said, "Are you free?" I said, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" She said, "Dad's died." So he had dementia, and he had vascular dementia. So I don't know if anyone's worked with anyone with dementia. It's quite, vascular dementia is really rapid. So I flew out and I came back and I started to really reevaluate my life and where I was. I'm still thankful to be here where I am now. I enrolled onto a course in the NHS and I'm trying to be a therapist for other kids. But this will tell you a little bit about where my mental health journey was. So this was for a platform called Just Ask Questions, where I shared my story and people were able to ask me questions openly. Oh, I don't even think it's even playing. I don't think the video's...
I wanted ways out of my existence. And at the worst of my OCD, while I was having constant suicidal thoughts, I got on the bus with my friend. And while we were on the bus, at the back of the bus, I had this obsessive, intrusive thought about fighting the guy in front of me. Had a big breakdown, started crying. And I just looked at my friend dead in the eye and I said to him, "Bro, I'm depressed and I want to die." I wouldn't move, I could barely eat, I didn't want to shower, I just didn't want to do anything. I did not want to be alive. I wanted time to swallow me up. Woke up and I said, I'm going to change the world. And I wrote my story and I took myself out of my depressive episode. Therapy gave me an insight and an understanding into the person that I was, the person I am, and the person I want to be. And if it wasn't for those invaluable insights, I would not be sitting here today to be able to tell you my story. OCD was the worst thing to ever happen to me, but I'm determined to be the worst thing to happen to OCD.
And I think one of the things I realized when I was diagnosed with OCD was people deeply, deeply misunderstand what OCD is. Whenever we think of OCD, most of us think of cleaning, obsessions with symmetry, and so much more. But the whole idea behind OCD is you have obsessive, intrusive thoughts that are on repeat. So for example, some of us might walk to a bridge and you might think, oh, what happens if I jump off this bridge? But for someone else with OCD, their anxiety starts spiraling in their head. Certain circuits in the brain will keep firing over and over and over again. It becomes repetitive to the point you cannot ignore it. Or I'm sure people have had really funny intrusive thoughts, like what happens if I kick the child? I'm sure some of us have had that. We've all had that. Intrusive thoughts, every single one of us have had it. I've had thoughts about punch the old lady in front of me, but it took me a while to get to a point where I can now laugh about it and I can make jokes. But the brain is a random thought creating machine. But for me at the time, I was having thoughts about absolutely everything. There was nothing that was not in my head. If there's anything you think that you think is disgusting, I probably have already had it in my head, every single thing. And I think a lot of the views that we have on OCD are deeply influenced by a show on Channel 4, first aired in 2013, called Obsessive Compulsive Cleaners, where it puts this idea that OCD is a quirk, is an adjective, it's something to be desired in some way, shape, or form, but it's not. It takes on average about 14% to 17 years for someone to be diagnosed with OCD. And it's because of it's how intrusive, but it's also how repugnant actually the thoughts are. How many people can go to somebody and say they're having thoughts about sexual assault? You'll probably get sectioned or put onto a ward. And recently, actually, there was a cost of illness analysis done by the University of Hertfordshire that showed that OCD treatment actually cost the NHS 378 million a year. And if you put into consideration a societal perspective, that's 5 billion a year. And I delivered a talk last year on a TEDx talk on the need for early intervention of OCD to prevent a lot of the issues that we're having. And OCD is very common. They suspect about 1 to 2% of the population actually have OCD, but we only think about it as a result of cleaning. And as I said, I think pop culture has had a real deep influence. Now, I speak a little bit about ADHD as well. Whilst these are diagnoses, I try not to make them as a part of my identity. And what I mean by that is these are chapters in my book, not the entirety of the book itself. I now no longer say I'm someone that has OCD or ADHD. I say I experience it as a way to distance myself from the reality of what it is. But ADHD is the new, in some ways, buzzword. A lot of people speak about it quite a lot. A lot of us associate it with focus or hyperactivity, inattention, and so much more. But ADHD has been around for a very long time. Does anyone have any ideas as to potentially how ADHD may have evolved in the human brain? This is a theory I would love to see what people think. No one has any sort of ideas. I know you guys read newspapers. If you don't read newspapers, then wow. There's no ideas of what you think ADHD may have potentially evolved in the brain or how it's evolved. It could be screen time. So the rise of addictive technology is creating actually ADHD symptoms. That's why the rise in ADHD and autism is to be deeply contested. We talk a lot about it in my clinical practice that a lot of children are just addicted to technology. And if anyone takes a look at a phone, I'm sure you do. Does anyone here, I'm sure you all have social media, right? If you open your phone and you take a look at TikTok or you take a look at Instagram, have you realized the way it's designed? How is it designed? And is there anywhere in the world that you go where it's designed to keep your attention constantly? A casino slot. I don't gamble, so it's not my thing, but if you look very carefully at how phones are designed, the constant scrolling is like a slot over and over and over again. They call it the never-ending dopamine treadmill. You're constantly searching, so a lot of kids will present ultimately with ADHD symptoms. So when I look back at my own medical records, they diagnosed me in the year 2000, and to some degree I align with it, but again, I'm not trying to make it the front and center of my identity. But whenever we think about ADHD in the media, these are some of the things that we see. These are some of the headlines, how ADHD may lead to trouble with the law, wrong, how the media butchers the facts about ADHD. ADHD has become an identity, not a disorder. We need a new way to talk about it. False diagnosis, the ADHD scandal. So what is really interesting is when it comes to trouble with the law, they actually suspect about 50% of prisoners potentially may have ADHD. Does anyone know why that could potentially be? Does anyone here have ADHD? Has anyone been diagnosed with it? No one? In the back? Do you have any idea potentially why they suspect prisoners may have, ADHD? Okay. So what's really interesting, impulsivity, which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to, the idea to make decisions really quickly without thinking of the long term. They argue that a lot of prisoners potentially are seeking out something what we call novelty, which is something really big in the brain of ADHD. They constantly need something that's new because the threshold for dopamine is so high that they need more and more to be able to keep them going. So they partake in risk-taking behaviors such as potentially drugs, sex, gambling. It could be all these different things. And that's one of the reasons they suspect potentially a lot of prisoners may have ADHD. And we think about the false diagnosis, the ADHD scandal. I'm not sure, has anyone seen that on Panorama? Anyone else? No one's seen it on Panorama. So it was the idea that because the NHS now are so backlogged with so many different people are going private. And when people are going private, the private industry, they are arguing, is it actually incentivized to give people the diagnosis? Because it creates a lot more money. So there's a lot to be contested when it comes to the idea of ADHD, but in the media, it's quite hard now to understand what's real, what's not real, to understand what ADHD is, what ADHD isn't, because it's been argued 24/7. And especially on the bottom left, ADHD on TikTok, raising awareness or driving inaccurate self-diagnosis. And a lot of people self-diagnose themselves on TikTok. And we argue this is called also social contagion. So it's the idea some ideas will push through society and everyone starts to jump on it and it becomes a snowball effect. And again, I think these are a lot of the things for us to think about when it comes to disorders and how they're now becoming identities. So people go, I can't do this because I have this, or I can't do this because I have that. And what I'm going to go on to talk about a little bit later on is potentially the idea that some of these disorders could be what we call a desirable difficulty. So a lot of people are not successful in spite of disorders, but they are successful because of their disorders. So the first question I like to use, and this is one of the best analogies, and I think it stumps a lot of people, but what is the difference between the hunter and the farmer? I suppose, what's the difference between the hunter and the farmer? One grows, one kills things. Okay. You put your hand up. Okay, how long you can pay attention for? Okay. Anything else? Hunter has to go out and look for things, whereas the farmer can find it around him. Okay, is there anything else? One gets paid. Well, some would argue food is a way to be paid, but this is a true point. One involves chasing something, one involves nurturing it. Okay, yeah, it's a great way to look at it. So I use this as an analogy for ADHD. And this is a theory, so this is not absolutely conclusive. This is one of the ideas as to why potentially ADHD might have evolved. And I'm going to go into it next. But if we look at this video, it's a classic idea of what potentially someone with ADHD may look like if they're looking at something they are not interested in versus something they are actually deeply interested in, attention-based focus. So it's not as easy for someone to turn around and say, just focus. It's actually incredibly hard. And looking at this student on loop over and over again, you'll start to think, what is wrong with him? But the way I'm going to explain it, I think this will help us to have an understanding as to why the ADHD brain may have evolved to be like this. So executive dysfunction, we call it in ADHD the disease of executive dysfunction, which affects inhibition and impulse control, working memory, task initiation and organization, time management and prioritization, and emotional regulation. Now, if we go to the farmer, I'm trying to remember what film that's from. Is that Hunger Games? I think it's from Hunger Games, yeah. So we ask ourselves who the hunter was. If you think about some of the skills that a hunter had to have, what skills can you think about? Tracking. Say that again. Focus. Okay. Anything else? Stealth. Patience. If I asked you to hunt something, how would you hunt? No one here has ever done like Duke of Edinburgh? Wow. I think I'm in a different country, aren't I? I've hunted before. That's because in Trinidad, we love to do stuff like you have guns and you can go and kill animals. It's been quite an exciting journey on that one for sure, because I used to be vegan, but I'm not vegan anymore. So a hunter actually, interestingly, yes, they had to be focused, but they had to be easily distracted. Can anyone tell me why they think they maybe would have had to be easily distracted? Got to be aware of your surroundings, what's going on. Okay, that's one potential. Anything else? Quick reaction time. Any other theories as to why a hunter had to be easily distracted? I'm putting your brains to the test, aren't I? One more, in case you got to be aware of something hunting you. So yeah, that is potentially another one. Now, yes, a hunter had to pursue many different prey, but he had to be unafraid to take risks. So if a hunter wasn't easily distracted, he could be killed by predators, number one. So if you think about whether or not you believe in evolution or not, that's another argument. But the way our ancestors potentially would have had to live, everything was out to kill them. You know, scorpions on the ground, spiders, snakes, bigger prey, everything would have been out to kill them. So the traits of a hunter would have been really important, but he had to become easily distracted. So if he started on one animal, but he saw a better opportunity, he had to quickly, otherwise what we would call impulsively, be able to alter the course and to pursue the new prey. So he couldn't chase something down that was eventually going to get away from him. He had to be smart about it and realize, okay, there's something else that I can probably get. And that's one of the best ways to think about when someone potentially with ADHD may have really changing hobbies or interests. This is one of the theories as to why it exists. But the feeling of impending doom kept him on his toes, alert to the possibility of predators, so he was aware about the threat. But the hunter actually thrived on the adrenaline high of the hunt. But the issue was he couldn't do boring tasks like cleaning, and it was so tedious he would end up procrastinating. So his idea of time would not be linear. He would either see it as really fast or really slow. There was pretty much no in between. The hunter had to know how to handle these traits. So yeah, either excited or bored. Now, if we think about the farmer, what traits would a farmer have had to have? Patience. You said nurturing. Is there anything else a farmer would have needed to have? An awareness of time. Okay, anything else? Long-term plan. If it wasn't as a result of farming, we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't have supermarkets. We wouldn't have half of the food that we have. So what other traits do you think a farmer would have needed to be able to survive? Planning, yeah. Is there anything else that you think a farmer may have needed to have? Understand the value of what he's grown. That's a great answer, actually. Anything else? Teamwork. Okay. So what's really interesting is once we evolved to be in a predominantly agricultural society, a farmer had to go through long periods of boredom. Because if he went into the soil and tried to check if the plants were growing, everyone would have been dead. He would have pretty much killed everyone. That's the best way to put it. And that's because crops, they take months to grow. The minute we understood the way things grew, we had to put people with certain skills to grow certain things. Now, if we look at society, is there any places that you think a hunter's skills would thrive compared to a farmer's skill set? Sales, that's probably one of the biggest ones. A hunter would do better in sales. Somewhere where he would be constantly on the chase, at the adrenaline hunt, the high, over and over again. That's where he would thrive. That's where his skills would thrive the best. But if you think about the farmer, we've actually built a society to be like farmers. If you look at schools, you look at what we teach kids to do, we teach them to sit down over and over and just repeat the same thing over and over again. Regurgitation and retention. We're not teaching them anything different. So we've actually pushed farmer skills and forgot that the hunter skills are what allowed the farmers to do what they did. Things had to work symbiotically. So the farmers had to do the menial, tedious tasks, such as picking bugs or pulling weeds. I couldn't personally imagine anything worse. But through the passing of time, he had to actually have really good processing skills, but also a greater ability to focus. He also had to have really good communication skills to communicate with everybody else in the tribe that were also growing. Because to grow crops is actually not easy in the slightest. It's actually quite a difficult task. And I think it's one of the roles in society that we actually quite often do look down upon. As a result of massive machinery now, we forget that the farmers still, their skills are so important to having the food that we do have in supermarkets. But the farmer could not be easily distracted, impulsive, or restless. As I said, if they pull the plants out, you'll never have food. But the hunter's sense of doom was replaced with the farmer's quiet confidence that the soil may not have moved in a week, but the plants will eventually come through. That's why patience was such an important quality for a farmer. But we've done that in society by teaching people that patience is the only skill that they need. Whereas if you take a hunter into sales, they thrive pretty much. I think the Wolf of Wall Street is a great example. Jordan Belfort, that's the kind of like hunter's environment. That's where they thrive the best. But the hunter's sense of time was linear and even, but he was only excited and bored when confronted with a truly exciting or boring situation. So he had a more of a fair balance and a fair way of viewing the world. Now, if we think about dyslexia, this is another really common disorder that people talk about. So where ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, there's a few other ones, they all exist in the same region of the brain. Does anyone here have dyslexia? How do you find dyslexia affects you? Any other way? You don't mind me asking? Putting you on the spot. Remembering things. Okay, is there anyone else? Does anyone recognize any of these figures? Does anyone know who the really big photo is? So this is Gary Cohn, the former president of Goldman Sachs, and I'm actually going to use him as a case study when we speak about dyslexia. Albert Einstein, Richard Branson. Richard Branson, I know he's quite controversial because he sued the NHS, but I'll try and leave politics out of it. So Albert Einstein, so there's a lot of theories about Albert Einstein, that he was autistic, had dyslexia, potentially would have had a cocktail of other disorders, but it didn't stop him from his island, or from genius, from actually being a genius. They argue if Albert Einstein was to be born in this generation, he would have been in an autism program and his intelligence would have been capped. People have argued that if we still, the way that he was a product of his time, but it was actually a blessing because he had the freedom to go out and do whatever he did. Whereas now his intelligence would be pigeonholed and curtailed. But all three of these individuals all had something in common, and they all had dyslexia, but they were successful because of their dyslexia, not in spite of it. Now, if we think about what dyslexia is, how would you explain what dyslexia is to people? Is there a way that you would explain it? Yeah. It's hard to explain, right? So it's a learning difficulty that makes reading, writing, and spelling harder. But it's just the way the brain processes things. It's just a different way that the brain processes. And that's me making it the shortest possible explanation without me going into all the science about gray matter and how there's parts of the brain that it's lacking enough gray matter. And I think, yeah, I don't want to go too much into the detail of it. So if we use Gary Cohn as an example, his dyslexia was seen as a desirable disability. So one of my favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell, I don't know if anyone's read any of his work. And I think he wrote a recent book called Revenge of the Tipping Point. It's another fantastic book I highly would recommend. So this is a theory. So he argues that Gary Cohn, as a result of his dyslexia, was successful. As I said, not in spite of it. And it's the idea that something that you struggle with, you have to have alternative ways to learn. So Gary Cohn wasn't able to read. He could really struggle to read, but he went to become the president of Goldman Sachs. And if I remember from the book correctly, for him to even get an audience of people to get a job, he had to pretend he knew what he was talking about. And in school, he actually had to learn to negotiate with the students to do his exams. So what did he learn from doing that? Communication skills, negotiation, emotional empathy, social empathy, all these different skills he had to learn because of what he struggled with. Whereas potentially, if he was what we would class as a neurotypical child, he may not have had to learn these skills until later on in life. So I think this is one of the best ways for us to think about things. But desirable difficulties, they're challenges that whilst we think they're difficult, they foster resilience and unconventional success. So I've broke it down into desirable difficulties in 4 ways. So resilience and risk-taking, compensatory skills, the inversion of difficulty and success against the odds. Can anyone tell me why they think resilience and risk-taking have been such an important quality for Gary Cohn with dyslexia? If you think about your own lives, where have you had to take risks? And where have you had to be resilient? Unless you haven't had to be, then I suppose we're all leading different lives. Is there anywhere in your lives you had to take risks? Get a new job. What is it about the job that makes it, getting a new job makes it risk-taking? Leaving your comfort zone. Is there any other ways that you perhaps have had to be resilient in life? Dealing with grief, yeah. Anything else that we can relate to Gary Cohn, perhaps why he had to be so resilient? Yeah. Absolutely. Resilience is probably one of the most underrated skills. We tell people all the time, get back up, but we don't name what it actually is. To take a risk in this world is actually quite hard. Life is uncertain. The one thing you're promised in life is death. You're not even promised life. That sounds a bit morbid, but to take risks in life requires you to take yourself out of your comfort zone. So for Gary Cohn to be successful, he really had to do that. He had to put himself in front of people who would have never given him the time of day. And if you think about compensatory skills, can anyone tell me why they think he had to compensate? And what skills do you think you learned from compensating? So if you're good at something, but you're not great at something else, what would you often do? Rule number one of capitalism. Yeah, negotiate trade. You outsource, right? So you outsource. If for Gary Cohn, because he could not read properly, he had to outsource to the kids that were smarter than him. He went into the class with teachers and he negotiated his grade up. So he learned social skills. These are things he would not have probably learned if he didn't have the difficulty that he had. And the inversion of difficulty. Has anyone seen the film, who is it, by Christopher Nolan with Denzel Washington's son? I'm trying to remember what it's called. They speak about inversion. They shoot a bullet, but it goes backwards. I'm trying to remember what the name of the film is, but that was the concept of inversion as well. So it's the idea that difficulty is actually desirable. To have difficulty is actually a good thing. So if I gave you a book that's really easy to read, it's actually a bit harder to retain the information because it's quite easy. And this is what we see with social media. Attention and focus is waning because there's no longer a challenge to keep people focused. So with Gary, when he did eventually learn to read, he had to read books 3 to 4 times to retain the information. So that made it even more solidified in his brain. Does that make sense to everyone here? Right? And if we think about success against the odds, Gary Cohn wasn't supposed to be successful. He was able to be successful, but if you look at him on any metric in society by which we would judge him by, he should not have been successful. So he was successful against the odds. And as I said, he's the former president of Goldman Sachs. And these are some of the books that I highly recommend to read, that I personally have really enjoyed. So The Myth of Self-Esteem by Albert Ellis. This man was the founder of REBT, Rational Emotional Behavioral Therapy, that argues that a lot of mental illness is actually in the way that we believe. And it's also in the fact we have irrational beliefs about things. We demand society to be a kind of way. We demand other people to be a type of way. And one of his big themes in his book he talks about is unconditional other acceptance. So learn to accept people for who they are. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Unconditional self-acceptance, learn to understand and just accept yourself for who you are. It sounds simple, but in his book it's a lot more complex. And unconditional life acceptance. So they argue that the struggle in life is we fight against everything. We can't change the fact, we were born to pay bills. We were born to pay tax. Sometimes I argue and I'm like, Mum, why did you raise me? Because I have to pay taxes now. I didn't choose this. But that's another funny analogy, but it's a fantastic book. David and Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell. This is a book where he spoke about the concept of in life is almost like Goliath, but we are David. Has anyone tell me why David was able to beat Goliath? But you've read the book, right? Oh, you haven't read the book, because I thought you were going to cheat. I wanted to see. So yeah, you said he was able to use the slingshot. Was there anything else that made David successful against Goliath? Goliath would have been predicted to be about 7 foot. This was back in days where that was pretty much unseen. Goliath underestimated him. Is there anything else? It's a great answer. So if I told one of you to fight me right now, right? Okay. If I told someone to fight me right now, how would you honestly fight me? I'm a lot bigger. I can fight. I do Muay Thai. How would you fight me? You'll fight me dirty. I agree. Why would you fight me dirty? Huh? Just think about it. Why would you fight me dirty? what advantage does it give you? You're not playing by my game. Does that make sense? So David did not play to Goliath's game. And there's actually an idea that with Goliath, he would have actually had a tumor on his pituitary gland, which would have caused him to essentially grow to heights unforeseen by most human beings. But also, when people fought Goliath, do you know how they typically fought Goliath? Close combat. The Goliath was only good at close combat. People would go and fight Goliath's fight. If you're 7 foot, I'm not going to stand and fight you. It makes no sense. And David back then, what they realized was, I don't know if I'm not religious, but obviously I grew up religious. In the Bible, Goliath says to David, come closer so I may see you. How many sticks are you carrying? I'm paraphrasing. So Goliath could not actually see properly. That's why he needed people at close combat. With David, he killed him because he did it at long range. And the slingers back then could actually sling rocks up to 30 miles per hour. And if it hit Goliath in the head, that was essentially like a bullet going through his head. So David did not play to Goliath's game. And that's reflective of life. If you play by other people's rules, I'm not telling you to go and dissent or to do anything like that. But if you play by other people's rules, you typically will lose. You play by your own rules. So one of the biggest things that I've learned is I'm relatively good at negotiating. So when I was in school, if I didn't really want to do work, I'd kind of, negotiate with teachers why I couldn't do this or I'll do something else. These are things that I learned. When I learned to play by other people's rules, I lost every single time. I had to learn to use the skills and the attributes that I naturally had. Another really good book that I recommend is Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for Dummies. So ACT. It's the idea that suffering in life is a choice, but pain is inevitable. So a lot of my journey, I've learned to accept there's things in this life I cannot control no matter what. For the last 3 years, it's been quite tumultuous. And when I learned to surrender to the pain rather than fighting up against it and resisting, I let go of suffering. It doesn't mean it's necessarily easy for where I am, but I'm in a considerably different place. And I highly, highly recommend this book. And there's another concept in this book called, I think it's experiential avoidance, where we try to avoid difficult experiences. How many of us in life have learnt more in good times than we have in bad times? You learn more in suffering than you do in good times, right? I'm not telling you to go out and deliberately suffer. That's not what I'm telling you to do. But if you avoid it, you're not doing anything for yourself. So if I use my relationship with the gym, I go in and I quite enjoy the pain because I know something else is going to come out of it as a reward. If we think about the way we treat our brain, because we quite often cannot see the results quite tangibly in front of us, we forget our brains are actually changing, it's rewiring via a concept called neuroplasticity. So that the idea that old dogs can't learn new tricks is actually false. Old dogs can learn new tricks. It's harder because we've deeply wired in certain behaviors, but this is a fantastic book for it. And The Accelerated Parent, How ADHD Can Overtake Evolution. So this is again a book that speaks about the idea of potentially why ADHD exists, but also potentially how ADHD can really help people raise children or how they can help impact within their own lives. So these are some of the personal books I recommend. There's other books I recommend, but that would be a super long list. So as I said, I want to say thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any sort of questions from anybody. Thank you. No questions from anyone. I feel like people are shy. Yeah, go ahead. How did I take the first step to take therapy? Well, I realized at home I couldn't talk to my mum, so it made it a lot easier. But I think I looked around the people around me and I realized the way that I was trying to approach problems were not working at all. I thought, like capitalism, you outsource, you go somewhere else to see, can someone else give me another solution that potentially would help me? So I'm quite lucky that the friendship circle I have, we're quite a reflective bunch of friends. We're a bit eclectic, a bit different, so to speak. So to take the first step, I just realized, like the idea of taking risk, what do I have to lose? That was the idea. What do I genuinely have to lose? So that was my motivation. But obviously, I'm sure as we know, motivation fleets and discipline is what will keep us going. So the times I didn't want to really go to therapy, I tried to remember what was it like when I didn't go. And I'm still in therapy to this day. And these are some of the things that I think that really helped me to realize motivation will leave even when I start the process, but discipline will keep me going. But values actually is something that I think is really important. So in my practice, we have something called behavioral activation. So if anyone's ever suffered from depression or lives with depression, it's one of the biggest things we use to treat it, where the things you do when you are in a good mood, quite often you stop doing when you feel bad. The idea is no matter how you feel, you stick to the plan, not to the mood. You do the things you don't want to do. So there's days I come back from work. Of course, I don't want to go and work out. I just want to go and do something else. But I remember, what am I stopping myself from doing by not working out? So values or something else I really started to figure out that was massively important to me. So that was something else that really helped me. One more thing I would also say that really helped me was to have friends who weren't yes people, actually. My friends and I, we argue all the time, but I know it's out of love. So assuming that the people around me had really good intentions and kept me accountable, that was something I highly recommend. You don't want people around you who always say yes, yes, yes to everything you do. You want people around you who will challenge you. I think challenging is really healthy. So that's, I think, how I take the first step, but also how I've maintained the steps that I am taking. Yeah. Yeah, maintaining your mental health is really important. I'm sure you would agree that another thing that's really, I think, vital for if you have struggled with your mental health is to realize happiness, it's so fleeting. We have so many different emotions in a day: anger, sadness, happiness, despair, and grief. They say often when you chase happiness, you actually become more sad. It's not always about feeling happy in life. If life was to be happy, I sound like a philosopher, which to some degree I'm a professional ruminator at times. But if you chase happiness, you end up on this treadmill over and over again. And what I think we see quite often in society when it comes to maintaining mental health is we're putting plasters and band-aids on things. And we're telling people, if you just buy this, you'll be happier. If you go to this event, you'll be happier. If you try to avoid this emotion, you'll be happier. As I said, it's in the pain is quite often where you learn more. So another way that I've been able to maintain my mental health is just accepting the emotions that I do have. So I think a great example is, as much as I do public speaking, there's times I genuinely feel like I'm going to pass out during a talk or after a talk. But if I gave up and I stopped doing it, I'm teaching my brain it's something for me to be afraid of. Any emotion you push away will keep persisting over and over again. The brain is a learning machine. The only reason you brush your teeth is because you were taught by your parents. Why do you brush your teeth? To prevent yourself from, I don't know, suppose your teeth falling out. You know the consequence. It's just a simple way that we put it for children. Repeat these things over and over again, and you learn that not everything you do is designed to keep you happy. Happiness is I call it a trap. And there's a really good book by Russ Harris, which is The Happiness Trap. And it talks a lot about this, that you shouldn't chase happiness. You should chase living. But if you live to be happy, fantastic. But if you don't live to be happy, then you can also live. There's a lot of people in life who have suffered. Some of my favorite philosophers have as well. So thank you for that. What are the most helpful things that people could do to support people in their lives who have ADHD and OCD? I think the very first thing is to go and get a deep understanding of it. Quite often, and I don't mean this, and this is something I told my friends to do, don't listen to me, because quite often I'm going to do behaviors that are going to reinforce my old negative patterns. So I asked them to go away, do the research, to not reassure me, to understand everything about, obviously you can't understand everything about it, but to have a relatively decent understanding. That's number one. And I think number two, to let people know that it's not an identity. It is not the book. It is the chapter. And I think for the first couple of years in my life, I made it my identity. So everything I did was, this is who I am, I can't do anything else as a result of it. So I created negative internal beliefs, and it just reinforced certain things with me over and over again. So if I give you an example, I'm 30, and this is the first time I've ever done a 9 to 5 in my life, because I genuinely felt I was trapped by a 9 to 5. I looked at all my friends and I thought, you miserable guys, I am never going to go and do a 9 to 5 like you. But I've learned more doing a 9 to 5 than I have now in freelance, because I was avoiding it. So when people understood me and they challenged me and they held me accountable, it really helped. So that's something I personally would recommend. And as a friend, just be prepared to be uncomfortable with your friend. If your friend's crying to give up, or they're crying to get out of things, sometimes a little bit of not tough love, but compassion, but reminding them what the end goal is will really help them. That's what I've had to do with some of my friends. So if I give you a personal example, one of my friends, sadly, he's reached 200 kg now. So he's considerably, grossly overweight. And as friends, we've spoken to him very carefully. We've been very honest with him. And he's at a point now where he's starting to understand how much of a struggle it was. So we keep reflecting with him. When we go shopping, we'll get him certain types of food. We don't try to restrict what he eats, but we try to remind him his end goal. And he's about to get married as well. So we often do say to him, do you not want to be able to run with your children? Do you genuinely not want to be able to experience life with your partner and your children? What you're doing is a form of self-harm. And there's other wider issues, but it's very uncomfortable conversations. And even thinking about it, it's a bit emotional because of the point he's got to, but we had to be prepared to have very uncomfortable conversations with him. But it was out of love. And it was us trusting that he knew that we loved him enough to help him get better. So that's something else I'd highly recommend. No problem. Listen, I'm a therapist, so I can stay in silence. And I can stare at people's souls and just watch. We can do a dirty fight later on. I like that. It's a good one. If there's anything else you really want to ask and you don't feel comfortable, as I said, my email's there, all my details are there, but I'm more than happy to stay and answer any questions that you may or may not have. See, I sat with the silence longer than you. I was ready to sit with it. Go ahead. Ideally, if I get the funding, and also lecturers are not paid highly enough, so I'm considering going to America or Canada, but the political climate's a bit tricky, so I'm considering my life. But ideally would like to do something in men's health. And why I say that is because growing up, I think what I really needed was to have role models. But sadly, I think for my community, quite often we view excellence as rappers or footballers. And I think there's so many other ordinary people out there who lead lives that we can look up to. So I want it to be ideally in mental health and to understand a bit more about why men sadly are taking their lives, why as society has become what we believe to be more equal, why men are struggling with it. There's a few things I want to be able to understand. And I have some theories as to why things are changing, but it would be something around men's health. If you want me to go into some of my theories, I can potentially. That's really what you want to know as well. But I really would like to do something to understand men, for sure, because if we look at, for example, psychotherapy is about 70% female therapists, and the clientele is about 70% women. So there's a treatment model that does not work for men, that it works very differently for women. And it's not that men are not emotionally intelligent, and it's not that men don't speak. Men communicate things in a completely different way. So if you think about it, quite often boys internalize their behaviors. I'm stereotyping just based on science, so please don't blast me. And they typically say women externalize it, so they'll speak to other people. And they say that boys, their first emotion is anger, but that's actually typically not what they actually are feeling. There's something else deep down going on. So, and I'd also like to redefine how we think about masculinity. I don't believe masculinity is inherently toxic. I think masculinity has built the world in which we live today, the buildings, the people we speak to, the infrastructure. I think things do need to change, and I speak a lot about that, but I want to redefine the way we feel about femininity, masculinity, men, how we can change the world for men. as well that doesn't disadvantage women. I think two things can be truths at the same time. So that's, I think, where I'd like to ideally be with my PhD. No problem. Oh, listen, I can wait. I can stand here and wait. Thank you so much.